I was buzzing. I could hear myself buzzing. I was vibrating. It was like something had moved. So I was just finally like at like 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, I just got to get out of here. And I walked outside, and in Taos, the mountain there is called El Monte Sagrado, which is the sacred mountain. And I just started walking towards it. And then this blood red sunrise came up over the mountain. And I just stood there and I was like, yeah, every day is a chance to be new. How much more reincarnated can you be than every single day? When you wake up, you have a chance to make a different choice or new decisions, love more, be better.
Welcome to Signs from the Other Side with Fern Ronay. I'm your host, Fern Ronay, and this is the place to share stories of signs and messages received from the other side. Real quick before we get started, if you enjoy reading about signs and if you enjoy fiction like Bridget Jones and Sex and the City, you might enjoy my books, Better in the Morning and Better Believe It. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe in Apple Podcasts and tell a friend too. Thank you so much for listening, and on to the show. She is known as Past Life Michelle on social media because she is the person to go to for all things past lives. Michelle Brock literally wrote the book on this. The aptly named Who Do You Think You Are is available wherever books are sold and perfectly explains reincarnation. And I was lucky enough to do a past life regression with Michelle. We're going to talk about that and her own extraordinary journey. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. So we know each other through Evolve Plus. And I was so excited to talk with you and to do a past life regression, which we'll talk about in the next episode. But it was enlightening, and it was a gift to me that you asked me if I wanted to do it. And I was like, Michelle, I thought you'd never ask. And I was very happy
I was so excited you were willing to go on that journey with me. Yes. I'm really excited. Yeah.
Yes, not only. And I'm happy to share everything that I learned because it was enlightening for sure. But your own journey is quite extraordinary. And I always like to start at the beginning, but oddly enough, I would like to start smack dab in the middle, or really, actually, I guess it's the beginning of your own journey for this particular part of your life. But you found yourself on stage in front of many, many people getting a past life regression with your teacher, the one and only. This is the first time you met him, Dr. Brian Weiss. And this experience ended up in Miracles Happen. So can you explain how that happened?
Yeah, right. It's like how the journey to be on stage, exploring my past life in front of hundreds of people. You know, my sister, who I'm very close with, had her third son, and everything was fine. You know, the baby was healthy. But after the delivery, she had a pocket of fluid that traveled up her spinal cord, and she had a mini stroke event. And obviously, it was shocking. They were trying to save her life. But during this episode, and actually she threw a 300-pound orderly across the room, a grown man. Like, she had superhuman strength, and, you know, just this really, really insane episode happened. And during it, she was trying to say something, but it was not in English. But it didn't sound like gibberish. It had a very specific emotional quality to it. Like she was trying to relay something. And obviously they were more focused on saving her life than figuring out what she was saying at the moment. But later, her doctor, who speaks Hebrew, said, you know, it kind of sounded similar to Hebrew, but some of the syntax and word endings were a little different. So perhaps you might have been speaking some sort of ancient Hebrew language like Aramaic. And, you know, my sister's never learned Hebrew or Aramaic. And then said, you know, there was a guy that used to work in this hospital. He was a friend of mine who wrote a book about past lives. It might be interesting to you, and gave us Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. And so that book is a story about a patient of Dr. Brian Weiss. He was the chair of psychiatry at that hospital in Miami, who in her therapy journey with him uncovered memories from her past life. And it's a fascinating book. Definitely go get it.
It's on this
but
bookshelf.
I got that. Yeah, it's incredible. And he's sitting there as a therapist going, well, they didn't teach me this in Yale Medical School. Like, you know, I don't know what's happening either. But she not only got better, she got happy and more intuitive. And It's a really incredible story. And I read it cover to cover in one sitting. It was the most compelling thing I had ever even heard of in my life. And I had, not grown up in a family that not only didn't believe in reincarnation or past lives, they were very devout Christians and very decidedly did not have this belief system. And even so, I maybe took an Eastern philosophy class in college that maybe introduced reincarnation as like a sort of concept that I kind of was like, oh, maybe, but I never personalized it. I never was like, well, who was I in a past life? Or did I exist before? And so when I read that book, I was just like, this is absolutely incredible. Not only did we live before, but we can remember that and use that information today. So I actually Googled, where he was going to be and found that he was giving a weekend retreat workshop, as he does. He's 82, I think, and still teaches. But, it's an immersive experience. And during the course of the weekend, you do these like group regressions. He does meditations, he talks. But then he says, I can only take one volunteer to come up on stage to demonstrate this. And of course, like everybody who'd come from all over the world, I think there was a woman there from Japan who didn't speak English well. Yeah. But she just wanted to be in his presence.
Yes.
A lot of people from Latin and South America. I'd just driven 3 hours. I was just like, let me just show up. And, but the second he said that, I knew, I had this knowing that it was going to be me without having any reason whatsoever to think that.
Yes.
In any way. But then I went up on stage, and I had this experience that completely changed not only my life, but the way I look at everything. And he was generous enough to include that story of that passive regression that happened, which was in 2006, so now 20 years ago, in the book that he wrote in 2012 called Miracles Happen. So,
yes.
And I was a man in that past life.
Yes. It's so extraordinary because you even were waitlisted and then you got on. You knew you were going to be picked just because you just felt it at that moment.
I was sitting there and I was nervous, and I kind of knew not only just like, okay, I'm going to get picked. It had this kind of weightedness to it. Like there was a certain responsibility that came with it that I kind of felt and sensed from the beginning. Like it was weighty. It wasn't like, oh, just raise your hand, this will be fun. This was like, ooh, your path in life is about to completely change. You sure you want to do that?
He did what you do in your sessions, where he started with a childhood memory. And you lost your mom before you were even 3 years old. And he brought you first to a memory in this lifetime with her, if you could describe it.
Yeah, so part of the technique that I did later return about 9 months later after having this experience to learn the passive regression technique from him. And part of the technique involves starting off by uncovering a memory from your childhood in this life. And there are a few reasons for doing that. But in my opinion, it's because, we want to reference the life you're living right now right away, because it's really the future you're creating and the present you're living that matter. And in my mind's eye, he has you go through a door. I'm sitting on this like very 70s mustard yellow vinyl high chair. And I in my mind's eye, my eyes are closed. I'm looking down and I could see had these chunky baby legs. I could hear the hum of the olive green drab refrigerator, the big 70s refrigerator. I could see the yellow curtains above the sink. And all of this sensory stuff was all happening at once. It was like the sunshine coming in, the hum, I could feel the sticky feeling of the vinyl on my legs. I'm looking around. I'm like, where is this? This is a house that we moved away from right after my mother died. So I had no working memories, and there are very few pictures of that house even. All of the pictures got kind of put away.
Right.
And then I look over to the side and I see my mother sitting there. She's holding a spoon. She's feeding me. And I immediately just burst into tears because I could feel how cared for I was and loved and how much I was wanted. My parents had a 10-year infertility journey before they had me, and then later my sister. So, just all of that was just really, really powerful. And yeah, so that was the first. I didn't even go back to a past life. I went to a memory in this life that was earlier than I thought that I had a working memory of. And it was profound and very beautiful and very healing.
He took you to a life you were a man living in Spain, married to the soul that is your mother.
I was married to because in my childhood memory, I had just seen my mother, her face, and I have a lot of pictures of her. She had very distinctive cheekbones and distinctive eyes, and I look and I see the woman who was my wife in that life in Spain, and she had that same look in her same eyes. And so I recognized her face as the face of my mother and her soul as the soul of my mother, because I just felt how much love and the energy of that love from my childhood memory. So I easily could recognize it as the energy of that soulmate love in that past life from her. And the whole story, I mean, go and read about it. It's in, I think, chapter 7, the chapter about grief. The whole story is about, I lost her to illness in that life, just like I did in this life. And, I kind of indulged myself in my grief. I sat and stared at the wall, ignored my 3 children who still had a parent who was alive, right? It just was like 15 years of therapy in 20 minutes as far as realizations go. And I've said this before, don't bypass the therapy. The therapy is important. But it made me understand so much about how my father dealt with my mother's death after she died in this life. And just the message that, life is for the living. Death happens, but go live. You can spend the rest of your life grieving, or you can find a way to find joy and remember that you're loved, and we've been with them before, we'll be with them again. All of that, it was pretty instantaneous. And the most healing experience I've ever had.
And it opened your eyes to the idea of soul contracts. So in that life, she left at a certain time and you had to learn lessons from that. And in this life, she left at a certain time and you had to learn lessons from that. And
that's right.
Yes. And so you had never thought about it that way before, or even...
I hadn't thought about any of this before, right?
Right.
And so again, I'm at this weekend workshop. It's like soulmates are real. Like there's life after death. There's not only life after death, there's before death, right?
Yes, exactly.
Stuff. So it took me several months to process that experience. But yeah, I mean, it was just, it's one thing to believe something, to have faith that something's real. And it's an entirely different thing to experience it directly, because then that becomes your own truth. I mean, you can still be skeptical with yourself. You can still kind of be like, well, I don't know. Did I make that up? Right? Truth is an individual concept. But for me, that was just such validation that, you don't have to believe it. Here it is. I saw it. I felt it. Yes. I knew it. Right?
Yes. It was real.
That's become my personal truth ever since.
Absolutely real. And you, I don't know if woke up is the right word, but after it was over, you looked at the audience and you could see everyone's aura.
That's an interesting, I wrote the excerpt that went into that book that was going to be part of a larger memoir I was writing. And at the time I was like, oh, I got to get this all down. It was my spiritual journey. And I remembered this past life and that past life. And then I finally was like, I'm 32. Why am I writing a memoir? And then she did nothing else, right? It just made no sense. And I realized it was just, and then also too, so many people have these profound experiences, what makes mine unique, that kind of thing. And so after I decided to scrap the memoir, I gave him the piece of it. And so that little piece that he ended up including at the end, when I opened my eyes after the regression, I could see auras. I saw glowing colors around people in the audience. And I think that probably what happened was even remembering dying in a past life, because he guided me through my death. And when I left that body, my grandmother, who had just passed 3 months earlier in this life, was on the other side waiting for me. She had a message for me. So even kind of remembering being in spirit, I think I brought a little bit of that divine celestial energy with me. And I had this kind of opening like some people call it like a kundalini. I kind of stay away from any of those words. Like, I'm not enlightened. Don't get it
mixed up.
There's no, I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, and they have this kundalini awakening. It happens sometimes where your chakras all open all at once and you're like, wait a second. And so, yeah, that was part of it. And I think that I tapped into some abilities that were psychic and intuitive that I'd had as a child that I had buried and kind of ignored. And they really kind of not only came back, but they came back with a vengeance after that experience. Like, I just knew what people were thinking, even if I didn't want to. Yeah, and it took a really long time to figure out how to kind of tamp it down and control it.
Right.
Because it was just like all of a sudden, all at once. Here it is. You know, how I had this kind of feeling like, okay, this is going to be heavy. This is going to come with, you know, an enormous amount of responsibility. And I feel like that was part of it. It just opened this door. And I've been walking through door after door after door after door on that same path ever since. I don't know if the doors ever stop, you know?
And when you were up there, were you nervous at all? Like, I have so much anxiety that I would be like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to relax enough to get the full experience. I know there was this kind of knowing, but were you nervous at all?
When I got up, I'm a pretty outgoing person, and I've been on stage a lot. I've been a musician my whole life. So having a performance background, I don't get like stage fright or anything like that. When I did get up there and I turned around and looked at the audience, I was like, oh, wait. Then I looked at Dr. Weiss, who is such a kind, compassionate, there's a sweet, gentle person. And he looked at me and he kind of like nodded. He was like, it's going to be okay. I was like, all right, I'm going to trust him, you know. And so, you know, I just decided to be like, let me just see what happens. So I did, when I got up there, felt the gravity of the decision I'd made to go up in front of people. But I was determined to do it. And I knew I was supposed to.
Yes,
so
exactly. I imagine, not that I imagine, I don't know if there's a way to teach this. I know you were trained by him, but he has a way about him. And you have a way too. Like, I felt very comfortable. I'm a pretty open person, but I just felt like whatever came up, I was going to be comfortable telling you. So
yeah. Oh, thank you for that.
You have the gift too.
I think that the most important thing when you're choosing somebody to work with is that there's some trust there, that you trust they know what they're doing. You trust you're going to be safe. And the way I navigate that is to be trustworthy. It's as simple as that. And I've done it myself so many times that, you know, I'm kind of like, okay, we don't know what's going to come up, but I'm pretty sure that I can help you navigate it just because I've walked. It's like being the guide when you go on a hike who has not only studied the map, they've walked the trail themselves many, many times. That's kind of what I feel like I am. I've been there. I know all the possible ways that this could go, although I'm constantly being surprised with new things that I'm learning. So
yes, but that's a good analogy. Shortly after that, your marriage had been ending, and then shortly after that, you got divorced. And I like to say, and it was kind of the point of my second book, nothing is a mistake. From everything you learn, everything is a life lesson for your soul to evolve. And even if the marriage was wonderful and it ended, or it was terrible and it ended, or it just ended because it ran its course, it was never a mistake. I never want people who go through that to feel like they made a mistake. It was a lesson.
Yeah.
Yes. And so he has come up in past lives as well. Like, everyone has.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's important to remember when we talk about soulmates, there's no such thing as the one. Because they're not just romantic, right? There are children, our parents, our grandparents, our friends, our spouses too, right? And it's possible to be divorced from your soulmate, right? Because I define soulmate as anybody you've known before in a past life. That's a lot of people, right? That we have various experiences with, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And we cross paths with them. We have these soul contracts. There's also free will. Like, we're going to get married, and you're going to have this choice, and I'm going to have that choice. And I remember, my now ex-husband came with me to that workshop, and it was only because it was my birthday weekend. And I didn't want him to go. I was literally like, no, let me just go. And he's, like any husband, he'd be like, is this a trick question? Like, if I don't go, will I be in trouble?
Be mad at me?
So he went, and he was so mad at me that I volunteered to go up there. He was like, why would you make such a spectacle of yourself?
Right.
And afterwards, and he left to go on a business trip, and he came back, and I just was like, this is something that I really want to explore. And he just looked at me, and he was like, I don't want to be that weird. And I was like, that is legit. He's just like, I don't understand it. I don't believe in it. I don't get it. I get that you get it. But like, this is not, and I was like, okay, done. Like, let's tap out.
Right.
Like, and you go do you, and I'm going to go do me.
Yes.
And so we did have a really amicable divorce. It's always a struggle when you get divorced with kids,
right.
But he was just like, yeah, this is just not for me. And so,
yes.
Then I was free to choose somebody who could be,
yes.
more in alignment with my path, right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
him too. So,
exactly. I always say find your weirdos, and he literally was not weird enough for the rest of the journey. And that's fine.
He just thought, he was just like watching me up on stage with my eyes closed, talking about being a man in a past life. He's just like, what? This is what she wanted to do for her birthday, so I had to come, but like, I don't know if I can handle that.
Right.
Maybe there's a lot of men that can't, but okay.
Right.
Yeah, so.
You were raised Mormon and ended up at Penn State. I know there was a time when you were at BYU, then you took off and you ended up at Penn State. This is another perfect example of all of these coincidences that happen. But if you could talk a little bit about your childhood and how you felt about religion and that year at BYU and then the path that led you to Penn State.
I was raised in the Mormon church, which now they call the LDS church. And not only was I raised LDS, I was raised in Utah, which is, there's a very specific culture around Mormonism, but the Utah Mormon culture is very, very specific. And so everyone who lived on my block and everybody I went to school with were the same people I went to church with. I had a big Rocky Mountain childhood, a lot of time spent outdoors. But I remember being very, very small and just not necessarily believing in some of the stuff that was being taught at church. And like any high demand religion, there's a lot of expectations as you grow up in the church to not only stay in the church, but like to hit specific milestones. And in the church, it's like to go to BYU or another private Mormon university, go on a mission, find a husband, have kids, do all this. And I just felt like I could see the rest of my life kind of in front of me, and it just didn't look like what I had imagined for myself. And so I did. I went to BYU. I got a scholarship for music. And when I got in, I felt like I had to go because it was a hard school to get into and nobody else in my church got in. So it was all this pressure to go. And immediately I just felt really isolated. And I've always felt a little bit like an outsider in my life. Growing up, I always kind of felt I had like great friends and I had friends that I felt got me. But there was always this little kind of like odd duck syndrome that I had with myself, right? Which now makes a lot of sense. But, at BYU, that became on steroids. I just didn't feel like I wanted to participate in any of it. So I would skip classes and I would go hike up the canyon and sit under a tree and read Whitman, Thoreau, Wordsworth. I probably got a better liberal arts education reading those books under the tree than any school. But I pretty much at the end of that year was like, I'm not coming back. My parents were like, well, we don't know what you're going to do then. I set out to figure it out. And, I knew I would. I just needed to figure out what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. I went to a lot of Grateful Dead concerts, which was its own kind of religion at the time. And just explored different parts of myself in a more kind of free-spirited way. And then I ended up at Penn State. Every summer they have this thing, it's called the Arts Festival. And it's a week of pretty much parties. And one of my friends from high school who went to Penn State invited me. And I see this guy walking and he's got a violin case, he's got a beard, he looks like he's in his 30s. And I'm like, hey, man, nice fiddle. Do you play or whatever? And he turns around, he's like, yeah, do you? I'm like, a little, And he's like, do you go to school here? I said, nah, kind of between situations right now. And he was like, well, are you looking to go to school somewhere? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, I'm the new violin teacher. They just hired me. So do you want to come to my office in a couple hours and maybe you can just play for me? I was like, sure. And by the end of that day, I was registered for school.
It's amazing.
At Penn State. And I finished there, and it was a wonderful experience.
Yes.
I made a lot of really, really wonderful friends. And then I moved to New York City the day after my graduation because it was where I always wanted to be. The diversity of it, the excitement of it. And I did not pursue a career as a professional musician because I felt like that served its purpose in my life, and I was ready to move on. Right. I've reincarnated a lot. Can you tell?
Within this life.
In this life.
I get that.
Yeah.
Didn't you get a violin to begin with because the teachers were like, she won't sit still. We got to. Yeah. So they handed you a violin.
In second grade, I don't know if it was the teacher I had or what, but I just would check out. I'd stare out the window, and then I'd get a whole page of math problems and just fill in random answers and be like, I'm done, So they thought that I couldn't do. That. Yeah, I was just like, I'm not. Why do I need to do this? This seems. I didn't see the need for what that was. Like, what was the purpose?
That. I was such a scaredy cat. I was always trying to be perfect and that to have the rebelliousness to be like, and not be afraid of your teachers is like a gift I was not given. I wish I had.
Don't know where that came. But anytime I didn't see a purpose in something.
Yes.
It just didn't make sense to me to put effort in to do. So they sent me to the school psychologist, and I very vividly remember this. I think I was like 7 or 8, and they gave me I guess an IQ test, and they finally were like, she's actually really smart.
Turns out.
We think she's bored. Yeah, we think she's bored. So they suggested that I take up an instrument, and I chose the violin, and I immediately got super into music theory, which was all about patterns, pattern recognition. All of that really just was how my brain worked. So my college degree, I have a dual degree in violin performance, but my main degree is a Bachelor of Arts in Music Theory. But I just think that was that probably neurodivergent pattern recognition. That was something that just kind of came naturally to me. So after that, my grades in school were fine because... Yes. I had something to focus on.
Yes. I love hearing this. And I love thinking of these moments in my life and other people's lives where it was like you were handed a violin at 8 years old and you had no idea at that moment that would be part of how you ended up graduating from Penn State. Like these things that we think are so maybe insignificant or just we don't think about it that way. You didn't know that you were being led on a path at that moment that would determine where you graduated from college.
It's so interesting. As you say that, the kind of visual analogy that comes to me is almost like in the New York City subway system, like you get on the A train, and then after a while, you got to transfer to the C, which takes you to the N and the R. And then each train, it is a different piece of your destination, and it's a different color and a different texture, and there might be different music playing in the background, different people from different boroughs and all that, but it's ultimately your destination. Yes. So that's kind of like the I'm like, I just keep jumping train stations, train stops, and the adventure never stops.
Yes.
So.
For anyone who reads your book, I know this is a popular story, but the Taos medicine woman, I loved her message, and I loved the whole story about her, which included actually another odd coincidence, but if you could tell that one.
Yeah, everybody loves that story. And she was such a character. I had decided, it was right after my divorce. So it was new to me that I had every other weekend to myself. And so I decided I wanted to kind of go hiking or kind of get away. And so I go to Taos, and at the hotel, they had this spa menu that included all these kind of spiritual things, right? Like you could do a tarot card reading or an astrology. And then it had crystal energy cleansing from an indigenous healer. And I was like, yeah, I need to do that. And so she came to the hotel, and she was not anything that I expected her to be. I thought all day, I'm like, oh, I'm going to meet this healer. She's going to be lovely and, smell like sandalwood and have butterfly
Comforting.
earrings and just like, that warm spiritual, and she was actually super gruff, at least from my perception at the time, right? Like she just like sat me down. She's like, why are you here? Why are we doing this? And so I, of course, was like, oh, she wants to hear my story. So I go in like, well, I just got divorced and my mom died when I was little. And I was like, not even a minute into the story when she just was like in my face. And she was like, that is a boring story. That is a really boring story. And it's like, what? What? I felt like traumatized. I'm like, I came here to bare my soul to you. And she was like, if you keep telling that story, it's going to keep following you around. And I was like, at that point, I'm stunned. So then I'm like, okay. And she was right. It was a boring story. It was a really boring story. And it was following me around. And also, like, she was also right. Like, why was I centering myself like that? Like, I'm not the only one with a story. We all have stories, right? And I just grew up in that kind of, way, that white supremacist world where it's like everything's about me and like, whatever. And like that was a big piece of that deconditioning process that started for me. Like, yeah, duh, everybody has a story. Why was my tale of woe one worth like all of the tears? And she ended up doing this healing that was a really beautiful experience. And I actually hung out with her a few times later that week. And because I wanted to learn from her, I actually went to her house one time, and she was kind.
Yes.
I made assumptions about her based on how she presented herself to me that weren't true.
Right.
Right. And how often do we do that? We judge people based on our own cultural conditioning, right? Mm-hmm. Our own filter by what we think is true for us. Mm-hmm. And yeah, she was just this really beautiful person. And the healing process was super interesting. She had all these crystals. Some of them were big, and she laid them. I was on a massage table. She laid them around me, and she had like smoke, and she was drumming, but she also had all these feathers. She was like beating me with the feathers. And at one point she was yelling, out, out, get out, out. I don't know what she was yelling at. I assumed the negativity I was carrying, but I'm like, yeah, get out. I don't know what you are, but whatever it is, get out. And then she afterwards said that she was going to go to the river to cleanse the crystals for me of the negativity. I was like, please do.
Give them a wash.
Get it gone. But, I think that she was one of my first indigenous teachers. And since then, I've actually sought out indigenous wisdom from several other indigenous teachers and traditions. And I find it fascinating, the power of energy, what we carry, the power of the stories we carry, how they can negatively impact us, mind, body, and spirit. And so, yeah, she became one of my most important teachers, truly.
Yes, I love it. To say that story is boring sounds like initially a little rude, which is part of the lesson. Like, you judged her. She turns out to be this like wonderful woman. But also, your story is boring is like, we all have stories. If you're just focusing on yourself, you're not being part of the one. Like, we're all one. And didn't you later, you couldn't fall asleep, so you ended up watching the sun come up.
Yeah, I did. I felt after she left, I was buzzing. I could hear myself buzzing. I was vibrating. It was like something had moved. So I was just finally like at like 4:00 in the morning, I'm like, I just got to get out of here. And I walked outside, and in Taos, the mountain there is called El Monte Sagrado, which is the sacred mountain. And I just started walking towards it. And then this blood red sunrise came up over the mountain. And I just stood there, and I was like, yeah, every day is a chance to be new. How much more reincarnated can you be than every single day? When you wake up, you have a chance to make a different choice or new decisions, love more, be better, right?
Write a new story.
Write a new story. And that trip ended up, I took a picture of that sunset, and I do have that in a frame in my office, and I look at it often.
And the coincidence I love is years later she passed, and you read her obituary, And she was Mormon.
I was telling somebody else about her, and then I was like, I Googled her, and it said she was a member of the Mormon church. And I was like, what? And it was because she had married somebody who was a member of the church. And what it said in her obituary was that she had this beautiful way of combining her indigenous spirituality with being an active member of the Mormon church. And so I just took that as another little synchronicity, that like she and I had a connection.
Yes, 100%.
There was a soul connection. And that one truth doesn't need to negate another.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that multiple things can exist within all of us all at once. So just because you have a new belief doesn't mean you need to get rid of, especially if it's family traditions or things that are meaningful to you. So
Yes.
I think that's important to remember. You don't have to, just get rid of everything. You can just always be adding new beliefs and experiences and tools to your already working toolbox.
Yes, I love it. I love your devout father's response to your book. The way what he said to you.
My father's wonderful. He's very wise and thoughtful. In the Mormon church, they have a belief that each individual is entitled to their own connection with the divine. So divine guidance is available to each individual. You don't have to go to a priest or a rabbi or any kind of, or even use any kind of talisman or conduit. And so he just was like, this is your truth. This is your divine, and you have a right to it.
Yes.
And, your intention behind it is good. And we don't understand it, but
that's okay.
We support it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been beautiful to have their support.
Where can everyone find your books and you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so my books are available wherever you like to buy books. It's available by audiobook. It's also available in the German language and in Portuguese in Brazil. You can find where to buy my books in the UK and Australia as well on my website, which is michelle-brock.com. That's also how you can find where to work with me. And I am on Instagram as Past Life Michelle, but you can also find me on Evolve Plus, where I go live every month and do a group past life regression.
Yes, perfect. And all of this will be in the show notes. So thank you so much. And next week we will go through my past life. And then the week after that, you answer all of the pressing reincarnation questions. So I can't thank you enough.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Signs from the Other Side. You can find me, Fern Ronay, on all social media at Fern Ronay, Ronay. I love hearing from you, and I love hearing your stories of signs. And if you would like to hear more episodes of this show, please be sure to subscribe in Apple Podcasts. Thank you again, and sweet dreams.